Another year, another Madden, another edition of my realistic slider set. Firstly, thank you to everybody who checked out the slider sets from last year. We did 40k views on the two videos combined, and the feedback for the sliders were overwhelmingly positive. We are going to be doing things slightly different this year though. Rather than breaking it down into two different videos, one for the sliders and another for all of the other game settings, I'm going to be combining them into a single video where I give you a complete guide into how to create a realistic franchise mode. I did the exact same thing with College Football 25. Video is currently up on the channel already, so make sure you check that out if you are playing College Football 25 at the moment as well. But without further ado, let's get into it. Now, as I said, this is going to be a complete guide to setting up a realistic franchise mode here on Madden 25. So we're going to be going through every single setting and every single slider from beginning to end. And like with previous Maddens, best practice is going to be to set up some things in the settings from the main menu before you start your franchise mode, and then import those settings in. So you want to begin at the main menu and go down to the settings. Now, when I say we're going to be covering every single setting and slider, I obviously mean only the ones that are important. I'm not going to be telling you to set your favorite team to the Colts, for example. You can choose whichever playbooks you want to use. So if a setting is either not important or personal preference, I would just gloss over it. Some things, however, we will leave at default, but will be important, like even teams. Even teams basically is going to adjust the ratings of players on the CPU team to compensate for any overall differences and to make the games, in theory, more competitive. One of the big issues on Madden 25 is actually that the teams are too evenly rated as it is. The very worst teams in the NFL are rated far too closely to the best teams in the NFL. There needs to be more of a disparity, not less. So I would leave even teams off for that reason. NFL launch playbooks, I believe these used to be called live playbooks, but basically these are playbooks that will update over the course of the season if the team is doing something drastically different from what they are doing in their original playbook that was used at launch. This is personal preference. If you want the playbooks to update and you want to keep kind of closer to what teams are doing in real life, turn it on. You can just leave it off and you'll just continue with the playbooks that were in the game at launch. But now we are into the good stuff. This is going to be a slider set that is designed for all Madden difficulty. I may well put out an all-pro difficulty slider set at some point in the future. That will be drastically different from this one though. So if you're looking to play on all-pro, this video can't help you out. For the time being, I would seek out a different all-pro slider set. If you're looking for all Madden though, this is the place to be. Simulation, game style, I would say is always the best for any kind of realistic offline franchise mode. By offline, I don't necessarily mean not saved to the cloud. I just mean you're playing single player against the CPU. Quarter length, I like to set to 11 minutes. Put the play clock on, turn the accelerated clock on, and then put minimum play clock time to 15 seconds. This is the same setup that I have for College Football 25 as well. It gives you the perfect number of plays per game, not necessarily to accurately represent the number of plays in a real life game, which would be ideal. But in games like Madden and College Football 25, the CPU teams don't have as many plays per game as you would see in a real life game. They have 10, 15, maybe 20 plays fewer in game than you would see in a real life either NFL or college football game. So we obviously have to tweak the quarter length and the minimum play clock time to get plays per game that reflect, that mirror, that match what the CPU teams are doing in game rather than what teams are doing in real life. I would like to set this to 15 minutes just because I like to keep things as realistic as possible. Games in real life have 15-minute quarters. You simply can't do that because you end up with too many plays per game. You're going to have the number 1 offense in the league, but the number 32 defense in the league, and your stats are going to be all out of whack. The coin toss logic has been fixed this year, so you can set your first choice to kick. In previous years, you would have to set this to receive. because the CPU would always have theirs set to kick. I'm not sure if that was a bug or if it was just the way that they programmed the CPU to make their decisions. But ordinarily in real life, you see whichever team wins the coin toss at the beginning of the game, they defer until the second half. That's when they receive the ball. However, because the CPU would always set theirs to receive, if you set yours to kick in 100% of the games, you would receive the ball to begin the second half. You would be kicking to the CPU to start the game. That's obviously unrealistic. You don't want to be doing that 100% of the time. You want some balance, you know, you want it to be 50-50-ish in terms of whether you receive the ball at the first half or in the second half. So you would have to set it to receive as well. So then it is just a 50-50 toss-up. However, this year the CPU will choose to kick, so you can choose to kick. Who knows who is going to get the ball when. The kicking settings are completely personal preference. Multimeter, classic Madden meter is completely up to you. Tap and hold, tap and tap. Do whatever works. We do now also have access to the revamped passing mechanics from College Football 25. And that would be my recommendation for the passing type that you select. This again is personal preference. You can use placement and accuracy if you want to. If you want to stay most true to the ratings of the players, I would choose classic passing. But I think revamped is the best balance between staying true to the ratings of the players. The best quarterbacks will feel easier to use. The worst quarterbacks will feel much harder. But it does introduce a slight element of stick skills. And I just think it produces the most realistic and the most fun results as well. So revamped passing, I absolutely recommend. I really enjoy it on College Football 25. I'm really glad they've added it to Madden 25. Passing slowdown, set to off. Pass lead increase. I am not entirely sure whether this makes a difference on revamped passing or not. I feel like it does. I feel like there is a noticeable difference between small and medium, and bumping it up to medium allows you to increase, you know, the distance that you can lead a player either up the field, across the field, when using the left stick, combined with some kind of pass input on the revamped passing. Reticle speed, I believe, doesn't make a difference. I feel like it changes the speed at which the meter increases and fills up if you increase it from the default of 5 to 10. But I think the reticle only applies to the little target that appears on the field. If you're using placement passing and you use the freeform, a little target appears on the field of where the pass is going to land. And that ties in with the reticle visibility as well. Even if you have it on, you know, visible or user only, you don't see a reticle appear on revamped passing. Meter visibility is another option. So I'm pretty sure this just doesn't apply to revamped at all. Hit stick mechanics, I just have them set to user only. You can leave those as default. Gameplay helpers, again, a kind of personal preference. If you're particularly talented playing defense, good stick skills, you can turn some of these off. Auto flip defensive play call, I would leave on. That's going to flip your defensive formation towards the strong side of the offensive formation. Ballhawk, I like to have on, as well as Heat Seeker Assist. But again, you can turn those off if you are better than me on defense, which is pretty likely, to be fair. If you do have Heat Seeker on, I recommend increasing the window size to 120%. So that's going to increase slightly the amount of time that Heat Seeker kind of takes control of your player. And again, it just kind of smooths out some of the wonkiness, especially if you are switching from one player to another and then trying to make a tackle. It smooths that out slightly and again, kind of produces the most realistic results. A slight switch stick delay, defensive switch assist, I also like to put on. So again, that's going to smooth out some of those instances of where you switch from one player to another and you take them out of the play completely by running in the wrong direction. That will help smooth some of that stuff out. If you want to know your responsibility, you can turn controlled player art on. I like to have it off simply because I like to try and create the cleanest screen possible when playing. Try and kind of create a broadcast style appearance. And coach mode, you're going to want off. Basically, if you turn this on, the CPU will control the quarterback if you don't make an input fairly soon. You obviously want complete control of your quarterback, so make sure this is turned off. Now, we also have some important sliders to get to in the game options here in the main menu as well. The first two we need to consider in conjunction with one another, and that's injuries, which are set at 20, and fatigue, which is set at 70. Now, these very much are a pair of sliders rather than two individual sliders. The more fatigue a player has, the likelier they are to get injured. So obviously when we raise the fatigue, we need to lower the injury slightly to compensate for that, or players are going to be injured far too easily. These two should also work in conjunction with the auto sub sliders, which we will get to in just a little bit. However, unfortunately, like almost every Madden in living memory, the auto subs basically just don't work on this game. In theory, the higher the fatigue should influence the auto subs, basically, because when a player is fatigued, your auto subs are going to dictate when they come out and who comes in. They work on College Football 25 is the most frustrating thing. The auto subs work perfectly fine. They work incredibly well, actually, on College Football 25. So how we can't have functioning auto subs on Madden 25 still, when it's literally in another EA Sports game, I don't know, but that's the case. Now, the controversial one, the player speed parity scale. We should have this set to 0 for this particular slider set, but it's important we address this in a fair amount of detail because there's a lot of misunderstandings, misconceptions about how this slider works. Most people think that if you increase this slider, it slows the game down. If you decrease the slider, then it speeds the game up. But that's not really how the slider functions. What happens when you increase the slider is you are essentially increasing the minimum speed that a player can have. That's not exactly what's going on, but it's an easy way to think about it. You're increasing the minimum speed that a player can have. So you're taking everybody below a 99 speed and you're increasing their minimum speed so that they are closer to those 99 speed players. So you're reducing the disparity between the quickest and the slowest players. That's why people think the game is slower with a higher value, because there's less of a disparity between the quickest and the slowest players. However, the game is actually faster. You've increased the minimum speed of the slower players. Those slower players are now faster so that they are closer to the 99 players. So you've actually increased the speed of the game, even though it's going to feel slower because there's less of a difference between the quickest and the slowest players. The opposite is obviously true if we lower the slider. We're actually slowing down the pace of the game, but we are increasing, we are maximizing the disparity between the quickest and the slowest players. We are lowering the minimum speeds that a player can have, so they are further away from those 99 speed players. So the slowest players are actually slower with a 0 value as opposed to 50 or even 100. So we've slowed the game down at 0, but actually it feels like we've sped the game up because there's now a greater disparity between the quickest and the slowest players. And that's exactly the reason we have this set to 0. I want the biggest difference, the biggest disparity between the quickest and the slowest players possible. I really want Tyreek Hill to burn defensive backs down the field. I wanted to leave them for dead. I want Anthony Richardson, Lamar Jackson on those read option plays to be able to break away from linebackers with ease. If you are sick and tired of slow linebackers, even defensive linemen, being able to chase down your 95, 96, 99 speed running backs, wide receivers, that's not going to happen to anywhere near the degree that it does on 50 if you drop this all the way down to 0. One other thing people need to understand here, though, is pursuit angles. Of course, if a 99 speed receiver and an 80 speed linebacker are running side by side directly down the field in a straight line, the 99 speed receiver should pull away from the 80 speed linebacker with ease. And with this set to 0, absolutely they will. However, if the 99 speed receiver is running directly down the field and the 80 speed linebacker is cutting across the field and has a pursuit angle to cut that receiver off, they should be able to catch them. That's what you see in real life. That's just how physics works. That's how angles work. So every time your 99 speed receiver gets tackled by a slower player, that doesn't mean that that slower player is faster. It means they have a pursuit angle to cut them off, and they've taken advantage of it. And then finally, here in the game options, you want physics-based tackling results bumped up slightly to 55. As the description on the right-hand side there suggests, when you lower this value, running backs are going to get knocked backwards. That basically the physics favors the tackler rather than the ball carrier. If you increase this value, then the physics slightly favor the ball carrier versus the tackler. Obviously, other things are going to come into play, like height, like weight, like various ratings, break tackling, for example. But we want to give a slight boost to the ball carrier because, again, we're trying to replicate what we see in real life. In real life, people fall forwards. You very rarely see those, you know, big spectacular hits where a player flies backwards in real life. You see that in the game over and over again. It's actually not too bad this year on Madden 25, but a slight edge to the ball carrier will again replicate what we see in real life in terms of players falling forwards at the very least. So second on the agenda is penalties. And again, you're going to want to adjust these in the main menu and import them into your franchise later on. I'll show you exactly how to do that if you are unaware. The other thing to note is that the penalty sliders do impact the gameplay. They don't just impact, and in fact, they barely impact the frequency with which penalties are called in a game. They have a much greater impact on how the players actually perform certain actions in the game. So you don't really want to think about these as penalty sliders exactly. You want to think about them as like a subset of the gameplay sliders. But you're going to want to set offside at 55, false start at 75, offensive holding at 55, face mask down at 25, illegal block in the back at 50, roughing the passer at 45, DPI at 25, and then some of these you're going to want to turn off. Ineligible receiver downfield, for example, turn off. Ideally, we would have all penalties set to on to replicate, you know, the penalties that can be called in real life. But some of them just don't function well enough to have them on. Having them set to on disrupts the gameplay too often that you're going to want to set them to off. Ineligible receiver downfield is one of them. It's just, it takes too many RPOs out of your playbook because players, offensive linemen, get down the field too early. You can never take advantage of the pass in the RPO. Offensive pass interference can be turned on though, as can kick catch interference. Intentional grounding, turn off when this is set to on. CPU controlled quarterbacks are a little too reluctant to throw the ball away if they are under pressure because they think they're going to get called for an intentional grounding penalty. Turn this off. They're going to throw the ball out of play rather than scramble backwards and then eventually get sacked for a 25-yard loss. They're going to do that far less often. Roughing the kicker, turn off. Running into the kicker, turn off. These are almost never called in real life, and they are called in the worst possible spots in the game. Once or twice per game sometimes as well. Just turn them off. And then you can, you know, attempt to block the kick. Not with impunity exactly, but a little more freely. Kicks are blocked more often than roughing the kicker is called as a penalty in real life. Illegal contacts you can have on. As for the gameplay sliders themselves, I did use my Madden 24 set as a base for this, and I adjusted from there, so I didn't start completely from default. Some of my values on College Football 25 have influenced these sliders as well. The games aren't exactly the same, but there's certainly some overlap in the way that they function. So those are some kind of sources of inspiration before I then modified for this particular year. But you're going to want, in terms of the player skill sliders, quarterback accuracy set to 55, pass blocking down at 45, 48 for wide receiver catching, run blocking all the way down at 10, ball security you should set at 50. This is an important one to touch on briefly as well, because I believe in the franchise sliders, we'll see in just a moment, but I believe this setting is called fumbles in the franchise sliders area. However, it is a ball security slider rather than a fumbles slider. So if you increase this value, then there are going to be fewer fumbles. If you decrease this value, then there are going to be more fumbles. If this is called fumbles, it kind of suggests it's the other way around, but it is the ball security slider. Pass defense, you want reaction time at 99 as well as pass coverage at 99. Interceptions can come down to 25 though. Tackling you want at 75. Like the penalty sliders, this doesn't just do what the name suggests. It does far more beyond that. This doesn't just affect how good your players are at actually tackling. It does affect things like pursuit angles, run fits, and all those kinds of things as well. So I have that at 75. Field goal power at 60, but accuracy down at 35. So you get a little more distance on those kicks. You can, make kicks from 50 plus, even out to, 55 to kind of 58. However, they are harder to make this year and even harder to make when you drop the accuracy down to 35. 50 for pump power and accuracy. Kickoff power can be set to 55. As for the CPU skill sliders, you're going to want the CPU quarterback accuracy set to 20, pass blocking set to 38, 25 for wide receiver catching, 5 run blocking with 45 ball security. So again, this is ball security rather than fumbles. So there's going to be a few more fumbles now that we have dropped this slider ever so slightly. Reaction time at 5, the same for interceptions, but pass coverage up at 25. Tackling at 45, 60 for field goal power, but 40 for accuracy. So we're giving the CPU a slight bump. They tend to have the leg to make long kicks, but not so much the accuracy, hence the slight increase there. 50 for power and accuracy on punts, and then again 55 kickoff power. So what you're going to want to do once you have made these adjustments is click the right stick and save these slider sets so you can import them into your franchise in just a second. So at this point, you're going to want to return to the main menu and start a new franchise. Now, when it comes to choosing where you're going to save your franchise, once more, this is personal preference. However, there are some things to consider, whether you're going to play on the cloud or offline. I personally prefer to do it offline because I can manually save my progress rather than having it auto save after every game or every kind of action in the franchise. It does simulate a little bit slower, but I'm also not relying on the servers to be online to be able to access my franchise mode. If the EA servers are down and your franchise is saved to the cloud, you can't play. Cloud does have its advantages. It simulates a little bit quicker. Obviously, you can play with other people. So if you're planning to add your friends or to, add people to an online franchise mode, you're going to have to play on the cloud. I believe it does update a little quicker in terms of patches and title updates. I think those tend to be applied to cloud franchises sooner than the offline. But I will take the slight delay to be able to A, manually save my progress, and then B, not have to rely on the EA servers being online. The other advantage of a cloud franchise, of course, is that you can choose when you start your season. If you start offline, you have to start at the very beginning of the year, whereas with the cloud franchise, you can have live start dates, so you can start in regular season week 2 if you want to. Now, once you've chosen your team, you're going to want to adjust some of the league settings. So some of these things we will have adjusted in the main menu. Unfortunately, you have to adjust them again here when you're setting up your franchise. So again, we want all Madden, we want simulation, but again, we want 11 minutes. We want accelerated clock on, but we want this set to 15. There are some other things in here that I like to adjust as well. Offensive play call cooldown and play call limit I like to set. So I like to set the cooldown to 5. What this means is when you've called a play, you can't call that same play until you've run 5 other plays. Once you've run 5 other plays, that then becomes available to you again to call. However, I do also like to set the play call limit to 3. So that means you can only run the same play 3 times per game. So these two things just keep you in check a little bit. If you're unable to control yourself and you want to call the same money play, the same glitchy play over and over again to exploit an obvious weakness in the CPU, you can't do that. So again, keeping things a little more realistic. You want to keep the defensive settings to off though. You obviously want to be able to run cover 3 out of nickel, for example, as many times as you want during a game, as often as you want during the game. So have these set to off for the defense. I like it at 5 and 3 for the offense. Dynamic momentum I like to set to off. I like it in theory. It just has too much of an impact on the game. It just had it has the swings are too big. If you start with extremely low momentum, it's so difficult to get into the game. If you throw an interception, suddenly the CPU have this massive advantage. If you get an interception, somehow you don't get as much momentum as the CPU team does. I just like to turn this off. There's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be ebbs and flows over the course of the game, just in general anyway. So I'd love to have this on. The impact is just too large, I think. I keep everything at manual, including the practice reps. Auto progress players, I turn off. You can turn that on if you want to. If this is on, then obviously the CPU will spend the skill points that you acquire or that your players acquire over the course of the year. Turn it to off. You have control over that. I also like to turn the tutorial pop-ups off. All of these things can just be set to keep individual. We set them in the main menu. Trade deadline, you obviously want on. Trade type, enable all. So you can disable trades. You can just enable human trades. You want enable all so that CPU teams trade with each other as well. Trade difficulty, again, is a bit of a controversial one. You might think if you're trying to keep things realistic, set it to very hard. That will maximize how difficult it is to make a trade. However, I actually recommend set it to very easy. That will make things easier. That will increase the number of trades that you have available to you. It's then, however, up to you to be responsible for making a realistic trade. That, I think, is the best way to do it. Rather than only being able to get, a future 6th round pick for your top 5 selection in the draft, in addition to the first that you would be, trading back for, you can increase the number of draft picks that CPU teams are willing to offer you, and then you can pick and choose the ones that would create a realistic trade package. Maximize the number of options you have in terms of trades. You choose the most realistic one. Salary cap, obviously you want on. Free agent motivation impact, I like to make high. Just make it a little bit more difficult to lure those free agent players to your team if they want to be close to home. If they want to be in a tax-free state, those kinds of things. Those kind of motivations are going to have a slightly bigger impact. Practice squad stealing, I actually like to leave off, or turn off rather. The default is set to on. If practice squad stealing is on, then CPU teams will just take the highest rated players on your practice squad, even though they could have signed them out of free agency. I don't know why they just don't sign them out of free agency in the first place. In real life, players that go to practice squads, more often than not, the vast majority of the time will stay on that team's practice squad for the duration of the season, for a long time, if not the duration of the season. So turning this off just allows you to keep a practice squad of players, whereas leaving it on, the CPU just snipes your players too often. Relocation, I just disable. If you really want teams to be moving around, then you can leave this on, but I like to disable this. Staff talent cost modifier, set it to slowest. This will adjust how quickly your coach accrues, points that you could, coach XP basically, that you can spend in the talent skill trees. Turn that to slowest and you will have the biggest grind possible to acquire those points. Injury on, practice injury on, pre-existing injury on. Progressive fatigue, though, I like to turn off. Again, like the dynamic home field advantage, the momentum mechanics, it just has too much of an impact on the game. I would love to leave this on, but like the wear and tear system in college football, we've come to expect it. It doesn't work as it should. If it worked as it should, perfect, we can leave this on. But often it just ruins the game. Your running back comes out of the game within the first quarter and then doesn't return. It's just something you see far too often with progressive fatigue on. So turn it off. Prospect storylines on. Draft presentation is pretty much personal preference, as is the free agent negotiations. You can adjust how many players you want to be able to negotiate with. I actually turn this down to 3 and 5 just to force you to focus on the key targets that you really want to acquire over the course of free agency until you get to stage 3, which kind of replicates, you know, late in the summer in real life. Then it can be unlimited. League type all, coach firing, personal preference. If you want to be able to be fired in year 1, turn it on. If you never want to be fired and you want to guarantee you're with the same team for the duration of your save, then you can turn this off. I leave career clock on, and I leave pretty much everything else as default. So in terms of the dev trait management, breakout scenarios, development trait regression, I like to have on as well. And then all of this I leave default. I see nothing wrong with 50 X Factor, 75 Superstar, and 400 Star Dev players. And then leave the edit controls to any player. You can adjust the abilities for all X Factor Superstar players across the entire league. Minimum roster size 46, unlimited player movement, no restriction, and then unlimited player cut limit during the off season as well. I finally just turned fill roster off. So if you leave this on, the CPU will fill out the bottom of your roster for you from players from free agency based on your team needs, basically. I like to have full control over my roster, so I just turn fill roster off. So you are then ready to start playing your franchise. And once you enter the franchise itself, the first thing you're going to want to do is scroll over to options, go to franchise settings, and go to gameplay sliders. So when you first load up your franchise, everything is going to be set to default 50, even though we adjusted them in the main menu. But here we can simply import those sliders that we created earlier on. If you're on Xbox, press Y. If you're on PlayStation, press triangle. And it's going to ask you if you want to import the custom sliders. You click yes. These are the exact sliders that we input in the main menu earlier on. So all of the player skill values, all of the CPU skill values, the special teams, the injuries, fatigue, and player speed threshold, all of the penalties as well, including the ones that we set to either on or off. There are 2 other sets of sliders that we need to adjust as well, however, one of which again is in the franchise settings area, and that's going to be the XP sliders. Now the XP sliders basically adjust how quickly players will gain points to put towards skill points that you can use to upgrade them in terms of their overall. Some of these you will want to adjust because different positions have different opportunities to accrue XP over the course of a game, basically. Some of these positions you want to nerf a little bit because they have more opportunities. Some of them you need to give a bit of a boost because either they have fewer opportunities or we simply see players at those kind of positions progress more quickly in real life. So we have the standard progression rates. We also have the age progression rates. So how quickly a player of a certain age will progress as well as the regression rates. So that's going to be the opposite. How quickly players at a certain position or in a certain age regress, how quickly they get worse rather than better. These are all by default set to 100. However, these are the values that I suggest that you use instead of the default 100. These are not my own work, but they are the work of Funky Corm on Operation Sports. He puts out a thread every year of XP sliders. I've used Mr. Hurricane in the past. Mr. Hurricane doesn't yet have a set of XP sliders out for Madden 25. I used his Madden 24 XP sliders and they were good. I have used Funky Corms in the past as well though, and I have tested these to verify you know, the quality of these XP sliders, and I vouch for the quality of these. I think it's a very, very good set. So I'll put a link to Funky Corm's Operation Sports thread in the description where you can check out the discussion about these sliders. But for offense, you want quarterbacks set to 80. You want running backs set to 120. Tight ends at 88. Wide receivers at 106. 90 for fullbacks. 84 for tackles. 74 for guards. 76 for centers. Defensive ends should be at 106. 82 for D tackles. 90 for middle linebackers. 88 for outside linebackers. 104 for corners. And then 112 for free safeties, 114 for strong safeties. Kickers, punters can be left at default 100, as can 20-year-old players, 21, 22, 23-year-old players. 24 and 25 need a slight decrease though, down to 90 each. 100 for the majority of players up to, or for all of the players up to 30 and 31, who again need a slight decrease. 80 for 32-year-olds, and then again 100 from there on out. In terms of offensive regression, so how quickly players get worse, 120 for quarterbacks, 80 for running backs, 100 the default for tight ends, wide receivers, fullbacks, 80 for tackles, and then 90 for the interior offensive linemen, 90 also for defensive ends, default 100 for tackles, 90 for middle linebackers, outside linebackers, corners, and each of the safeties. Default again for kickers and punters. And then the regression rate starts at 26 this time, which is going to be default along with 27. 28 should be dropped to 90. 29 to 80. 30 also to 90. 31 should be left default. But then you want 110, 120, 130, and 130. For 32, 33, 34, and 35-year-olds respectively. Now, the final thing that you will want to adjust before you can start playing your games are the auto subs, which can be found in the manage staff area on the franchise home screen. Now, like I said earlier, these auto subs don't really work as they should. I am using the same auto subs that I've been using on College Football 25. And again, they work perfectly on College Football 25. Madden 25, for some reason, just has always had an issue with the auto subs. So these will give you some rotation, particularly on defense, particularly along the defensive line. Your defensive ends, your defensive tackles, you tend to see a decent amount of rotation there. Running backs as well do tend to rotate through relatively often, but not often enough. Probably the same we could say for wide receivers as well. However, I do have to supplement these with formation subs far more often than I do on College Football 25. So by formation subs, I don't mean in the main menu, but during the game. So on the PlayCall screen, if you scroll across to formations, choose the formation you want for that particular play, and then press Y or triangle, you can manually sub players in and out of that particular formation. So these, in combination with those manual formation subs, you can get a good rotation of players. So just to break down the subs themselves, because again, there's some misunderstanding and misconceptions about the auto sub sliders. It's not particularly clear how they work, but basically the sub out value is going to be the fatigue level that one of your players is going to leave the game. So they will start the game with 100 fatigue, for example, Once they've run a couple of plays, that fatigue level, will drop. It's more of a, a stamina level than a fatigue level. Fatigue suggests tiredness. Their tiredness will increase. Their stamina, however, will decrease. Once running backs hit 93 fatigue, for example, they will come out of the game. The sub in value it represents the fatigue threshold that a player needs to reach before he will be subbed back into the game. Most people think, shouldn't these values be the same? If I'm subbing one player out, then I'm going to be subbing a different player in. So these should be the same. You will be always subbing a player out, and obviously you will always be subbing a player back in, but the sub in slider dictates who will be subbed in. If you've got 3 running backs, your starting running back reaches 92 fatigue, so has to be subbed out. Your second string running back will be subbed in. If your second string running back is also below 93 fatigue, though, then your third string running back will be subbed in. So obviously it will always be a 1-for-1 swap, but the numbers, the values represent the fatigue level of the individual player. It determines which starter is going to be taken out and which of the backups are going to come in to replace them. So you're going to want quarterbacks at 0 and 1. Obviously, you don't want your quarterback to come out of the game unless you manually take them out of the game during a blowout one way or the other. If they get injured, if they take a big hit, something like that, you can manually remove them from the game. Running backs, you want a much more frequent rotation. So 93 and 96 should be the values there. Similar for wide receivers, but 73 and 85. Fullbacks and tight ends, 75 and 85. And then offensive line is the same as quarterbacks. They stay in for every single snap unless there's some kind of an issue. So 0 and 1 there. Defense tends to have a constant rotation almost across the entire unit. So defensive tackles, you're going to want a 84 and 93. The same for defensive ends. Again, you do get a decent enough rotation of your defensive line with these auto sub sliders. You will have to make some adjustments using the formation subs during the game. Linebackers, 77 and 90. Corners, 75 and 88. And then the same as well for safeties. So there you have it, every setting and slider explained, so you can start your own realistic franchise mode on Madden 25. Let me know in the comments below if you would like any sliders explained in more detail or clarified how they function. Let me know in the comments how they play for you as well, whether there's any adjustments that you think need to be made. I personally think Madden 25 is a decent enough game. It's very similar to Madden 24. Pretty much they've added some storylines and press conferences in franchise mode, and beyond that, it's not too different. Some quality of life adjustments to things like the draft and presentation of information there as well. But on the field, it's a very, very similar game to Madden 24, and I think these settings and these sliders play well. I'm enjoying the game anyway. They're working well for me. Hope they work well for you, and I will see you in the next one. Take it easy.